Imagine the impact on your business if you have the capability to reduce costs while increasing your efficiency to help you win more tenders, being able to communicate to clients or project stakeholders the exact status of a job based on real-time transparent data, and submit project claims based on indisputable proof of work done. In today's podcast, we discuss the fast evolving space of drone technology in construction. It's a very relevant topic and I'm sure you guys are going to love it. To get notified of upcoming videos, please hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. Hello, Maria, and welcome to the SiteShed podcast.
Hi, Matt, how are you?
All the way from Seattle.
It's just the perfect summer here in Seattle. Perfect time
Really?
to be here. Highly recommended to everyone.
Sure. So, welcome. Thank you for coming today. We're going to be discussing technology today, which it's not a new topic on the SiteShed podcast. However, today we're going to be putting a bit of a unique spin on this topic because we're going to be talking about some of the field-based implementation, technology-based tools that are available. And we're going to be touching on things like the evolution of drones and how that's having an impact on, I suppose, the construction industry as a whole from all different stages throughout the development program, which is quite an interesting evolution over the years. And I suppose that, this was a conversation that probably wasn't relevant only 5-10 years ago, and now, we're seeing it more and more. So it's quite an exciting space. And I think there's definitely a level of impact which is being reflected into various, lots of different areas of trades, different, like from building right through to, roofing. I mean, I know I've got clients that have drone businesses where they basically go around and they survey roofs via drones. Like, it's amazing. And of course, it is kind of new. And we spoke a little bit offline before about some of the implications and some of the liabilities that are put in place with drone use. So I think a lot of people out there love the idea of it, but they're not quite sure about what the boundaries look like in the space of being able to use them without getting in trouble with the authorities. But anyway, it's an exciting space. So thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about TraceAir, and what you guys do and how it all came about.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a great topic to discuss, and I can really relate to this phrase of like, wow, we are now really discussing that seriously on like how to specifically implement that, while it was not a topic even, 5 years ago, maybe it was a topic, but 7, not a thing. So, we in TraceAir were kind of part of this evolution. We lived through that firsthand. And so I'm happy to share some perspectives here. So quickly about myself, I am one of the co-founders and head of product here at TraceAir. And just, as a quick background, what TraceAir does, we work with home builders and land developers on the site work stage. So it's the construction phase during grading, utilities, paving, that stage before the vertical actually starts. And so we work directly with the owners, but also with the trades as well. So grading contractors, utility contractors, SWIP contractors, those folks are our beloved users, and we do know their pains and processes very well.
Sure.
And so basically what the company is doing is that we provide software and services during that construction phase. And what is happening is that the drones are regularly flying above the construction site, making tons of pictures, and then stitching those pictures together into a very accurate, measurable, interactive 3D model, 3D copy of this construction site. And then the software allows you to compare what is right now on the construction site with the design, how it was planned, how it was designed, and highlight all the mismatches or any discrepancies out there, being very visual. So this is the story about, a picture paints 1,000 words. And
Sure.
The idea behind that is once you have an ability through drones, because the drones evolved over time and became very cheap and very accessible sensors to make the copy of your job site, it provided the ability to make a very, very fast feedback loop for the construction teams on how things are evolving, what's the progress, how to track the progress of your job site specifically for the site work. Because traditionally it was so challenging all the time. That's why land development is one of the major risks of the development overall, right? Like if you look at the vertical construction, usually, well, it has its cost, but it's more or less predictable because you know what's going to happen. While the land development, the site work, is just, it's a decided thing that it has a lot of unknowns. It's the highest risk. And the reason why is that usually before drones era, people did have this quick feedback loop. They were grading, they were putting the utilities down, but they didn't know how well they're doing. It was kind of this situation, a lot of guesstimates of very experienced people, but still it was not objective. It was not measurable in a sense. And so the sensors, the drones, enabled that to be way more consistent, able to get the copy, the topo of your job site on a weekly or sometimes even daily basis. And we saw our goal as a company to kind of give the tools and data into the hands of people who actually build, like field personnel, contractors, superintendents, foremen, those folks, because they are the ones who they're usually not the software users. They're usually not sitting in front of their computers. They're out there building the job site, right, in the fields. But they are missing the data to make the database decisions. So our goal was to build a product that would enable them to kind of streamline their processes to make database decisions, even though they're usually not used to this approach. And the drones were a very, very big part of it because they are the sensors to copy the reality.
Sure.
Yeah.
So would a typical use case be like, I mean, if we're talking about like before drones, when there's, builders like, let's say in the like the excavation stage, or they're basically, they've got to get the land graded and they've got all that kind of stuff. They might have to remove fill, where traditionally they'd have to go around with a laser level and they'd have to sort of measure depth. And now you're saying they can pretty much do it from an aerial perspective using drone technology.
Well, pretty much. So before, the approach was as follows. You do one accurate topo in the beginning of the project to capture the existing ground as is in the beginning. Then you take that, give it to the engineers, and those smart folks create all the designs, all the civil designs, right? Like grading plans, utility plans, all of that. And then the other topo that is happening is once everything is expected to be done. And apparently like 6-7 months past, or like in a year from now, surveyors are out in the field trying to certify the finished lots, and they figure that, wow, they're totally off the design. And there's already nothing you can do because the site is fully developed and you're stuck with, let's say, excess of dirt, which you have to export now. And it's very expensive. Everyone knows that it's it's way cheaper to move the dirt within the site. It's like, it could be like 10 times more expensive to export or import the dirt if you're lacking it. Or there is some significant clash with utilities, or the pavement date is passed so much that all the financial plans are screwed, right? So all of that is the more or less, the reason of it is because people have only one measurable data point in the very beginning of the project, and frequently it's not too accurate. Frequently it's very outdated. It's just, the terrain changes so much for various reasons. And so now when you kind of break this logic and you say it's not only in the beginning and in the end, it's totally possible and economically affordable to do multiple cheap topo checks in the middle of the project, which gives you an ability to adjust the civil design, to adjust the amount of equipment if you are behind the schedule, to adjust something else, and to schedule your crews accordingly. that really helps the project to evolve faster and with less errors and things like that.
Would you say the technology currently lends itself more to like larger developments, or is it being used in the residential scale as well, like with just like a single home, for example?
Yeah, well, definitely a single home situation is not really the case because,
Mm,
well, land development of the single house is still a risk, but that not that much of a risk compared to, let's say, master plan community development, when
sure,
you have 100 homes delivered, 100 lots delivered as a phase. So
sure.
our experience mainly is based on, like top home builders in the US, right? They usually deliver, master plan communities or
Yeah,
um, projects of, I don't know, 50 houses. So there are small projects which are 2 acres,
yeah,
3 acres large. It is still pretty big developments in a sense.
sure.
But for the developments which are, we call them Godzillas, meaning that they are like incredibly large, like master plan
Yeah,
communities. It's basically a new city
sure.
being developed. This is where the drone technology is one of the key resources. Some of our customers say that's the basic fabric to introduce um, the culture and to introduce the processes at all. Because when you have so many stakeholders in the construction project, and that's the
Sure.
case usually for the bigger development, you just can't align everyone without an updated picture all the time.
So is the real smarts here in the hardware, or is it in the software? Because like, can anyone just send a drone up on a certain path to map out the topography of their project and then feed that into the software? Or does it have to be specific drones?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. The major miracles are happening not in the drone part.
Yeah,
So the drones are highly available right now. DJI, perfect. You just click, order it, and in a
yeah,
couple of days it gets delivered to your house or whatever.
yeah. I
Like
just bought one.
easy, easy, right? Like so many software providers that allow you to make the flight mission, right? Because you not only have to have the drone, you also have to give the flight mission to the drone so that automatically it will launch and run this scan. It's like zigzags, which would make the pictures with
Ah,
specific overlaps following the specific path. It's not the pilot who is doing that. It's the automated software that is doing that.
gotcha.
The pilot
Okay,
is only, he only has to kind of set up the borders of the project, and then it goes by itself. The major miracle is actually happening on two things. One, regularity of this scan. So the
hmm,
company who wants to kind of introduce this technology for their operations, they have to understand that it shouldn't be the special occasion to do the drone scan. It has to be
hmm,
like a scheduled thing. Like every Monday, the whole team is getting the scan, and that's for that
sure.
you need to establish a lot of processes. You need personnel, you need people for that. You need processes. You need like all the documents, all of that, right? So it's kind of a headache, but at the same time, um, like it pays off. So regularity is one thing. And the other thing is, what do you do with this data? So you need the software, the UI, some interface for your team to ultimately use this data. And how we
Sure.
see this is that it could be, um, like a dead path when you only think that, oh, well, that's tech, that's the data, and so only engineers should work with this ultimate data, and they will provide us field personnel with the insight. No, that doesn't make it easier. What does
Sure.
make it easier is when everyone on the project team, starting from field and up to the office, like VP of land development guys, any people collaborating with the city authorities, any project managers, when they have the access and tools to measure and assess the drone data. So I see
I
those
mean,
two major things. Mhm.
it's kind of like if you go and get a MRI scan or a CT scan, like you need the doctors to be able to read it. Like they get the data, but it's got to be put into a format that people can actually understand, right? Like it. So
Absolutely, absolutely. If you
yeah,
just, and also it's the level of adoption, I might say, right? Like you can
Yeah.
Only just look at the picture and you will get so much value out of it for communication. Many people say that this is a storytelling tool for them, right? Like in order to explain the issue that is happening on site, you either spend the hour on the phone or on the Zoom call on the meeting to explain what is really happening on the job site, explaining non-construction people with construction problems, right? Pictures help.
Sure.
But the other thing is that, let's say, foreman or superintendent, they don't really need a picture. They usually need numbers, like, okay, what's my side balance, right? Like how much cut and how much fill I have here, and what would be my grading strategy so that I don't have the excess of dirt? How should I distribute the equipment here and there so that it works to the most efficient degree, et cetera, et cetera. For that, they need measurable interactive tools. And this is where, like you need that. You need to implement that. And for that, you need to overcome some, hesitation that it can happen. And which really believe.
So is the largest sort of, I suppose, application of this sort of technology currently, is it really in that civil stage? Is it in the roads? Is it in the grading? Is it in the leveling? Or is it also used like when we start getting out of the ground?
Well, I must say it definitely is being used further as well. So we already, even with current customers, we see that organically some home builders, they continue using the technology even when the houses started to build, right? Even though the major problems are already under the roof, still there are roofs that you need to inspect.
Sure.
Still, you have so many logistics problems, right? Like how to deliver materials here and there, like where to stockpile them, like where many different use cases. So in residential sector where we are mainly working, this is definitely the case. This evolves into that direction. Of course, on the grading, it's just way more value, but there's still some value on the vertical stage as well. Though for the other sectors, like industrial sectors or infrastructural, right, when we are talking about, factories or very complex buildings, the major risks there are not even in land development already, but rather in this vertical construction. And for that, you need the proper sensor to capture the reality. And drones, like quadcopters with the camera and the photogrammetry algorithm being the major basis, no longer applies. Like you need a different type of sensor to capture the reality. And we do see the companies out there in the field doing that, right? Like they're using lidars, they're using like robots inside the buildings, scanning the interiors and then comparing that to design as well.
Because I was going to ask that. It was like, is the tech currently focused really around topography, or is there, other layers to it? Like I've got a colleague and a friend of mine who has a drone business, and he works in agriculture, and their business is essentially to survey land and property to establish where the most water lies underneath the surface. And of course, it's very, very sought after technology, because it's when you're speaking with farmers in places that don't typically have a lot of water, it's really important to know where to plant which crops, and where you all that kind of stuff, right? So, like parlaying that into construction, I was wondering if it goes beyond just that topographic sort of a model, and there's more things that can measure things like elevations and things like that. Because I mean, obviously at the moment, when you're building construction projects and you've got different stories and they all run off different levels and that kind of thing. Like at the moment, I suppose it's quite a manual process. You got to do it through laser levels and benchmarks and that kind of stuff. Whereas I'm wondering if drone technology can replace a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, it's always the question where the pain is, right? The business would follow the pain. So there's a lot of pain in the site work, being grading utility just by nature, because there are so many uncertainties. Like no one knows what's under the ground, right? So you never know what to expect there. And it's always a surprise. So the budgets and schedules are, torn away. Though, especially in residential, that might not be the case in other industries, but in residential, when you talk to people from the vertical, they say, well, I can build a house with a closed eye. Like, really, it is way more standard. There are nuances, yes, there are risks, but it's way more straightforward than site work. So the pain there is less in the actual execution, right? Like actual building houses, let's say, because they are more or less standard and the processes are there. It's really good, really good. The pain is more in more, marketing, economic, tracking, business-wise things, like what types of products, right? And tracking labor shortage, materials. Like, this is what on top of the heads of executives in there, rather than just how to in a more optimal way build a house. Not that. So yeah.
So you mentioned before, like sort of establishing a layer of transparency through, stakeholders, for example, or if not stakeholders, certainly different, partners of a project which need a consistent communication in relation to various, aspects of a project's development. Is a lot of this technology being used to, I suppose, as you were saying before, it's not so much about the data, it's how it's communicated. When you've got a project which is in a development stage and, there are different bodies that do need communication based on progress, does the technology essentially put it into a format where people can understand it? And you say, hey, listen, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening here. We're behind here. We're not behind here. These are the reasons why. And they can justify it. Like, for example, if they've had, here, for example, where we live, we've had pretty much 12 months of nonstop rain and construction projects have been feeling it pretty bad.
Yeah.
And, aside from, I suppose, being able to say, well, we're behind because of rain, like, you can sort of quantify and justify where we're behind and, what happens next. Is that the idea?
Yes, absolutely. You're right to the point. And even, for the case you've mentioned with the rains, what we saw, even though the actual construction stops because grading contractors can't move dirt, can't move mud.
Correct.
They only can move dirt, right? So if it's raining, stop. But there are a lot of risk assessment, which falls on the shoulders of project managers and, higher executives. Okay, what is our SWEP stormwater pollution program, right? Like, how the water would run off the job site. Like, would we break any policies here and there? And like, would everything run properly if the rain starts, right? So you need the terrain, you need the picture, you need to see whether the specific, pollution prevention items are installed, right? Like fences or things like that, and like how everything would work with rain. That was a surprising use case, which we found, but that is also the case because before, the solution to this problem prior was that you have a person who goes to the job sites, who follows the weather forecast, right? And prior to the rain, he has to go and check and make sure, like, physically go and check and make sure it's prepared. During the rain, come and check that it works properly, and after the rain, come and check that it works properly. Like, it's a lot of man hours there, which you could reduce to some degree, sometimes significantly, when you have the planning, digitally, when all the information you need is available right in front of your eyes.
Yeah, I imagine like that water management, for example, when you've got like a clear topographic map of the project would, in my experience back when I was in the construction game, it was very much a visual thing. You go there and go, well, if it rains here, water's going to run down there, but you don't really know. Like, you're sort of guessing to a degree. Well, you're not. Like, you can visually see things, but that said, I suppose I'm dealing with smaller projects than perhaps what you're referring to. But the point is, having it like a black and white, this definitive topographic map would certainly, you would think, help in the modeling stage where you can really, iron out a lot of these potential obstacles.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And that's, you kind of do see that with your own eyes, but just from like not visiting the job site, right? So you open like a 360 panorama and like you are as if you are on the job site. Then you open the terrain and you actually measure the slopes, like you get the numbers, right? And you can run the specific cross sections and see how the terrain changes here and there, and you can draw on your interactive map and share that right away with your contractors so that they follow. So that makes this communication collaboration part so much easier, that you literally can optimize, like for example, being the management layer of the trades, you can really optimize on the hours you spend in commuting to one job site or the other job site, because it's your responsibility in the end of the day, but there's only 24 hours in the day, so you can prepare for the meetings you have in the field in advance, so that the time you actually spend in the field is way more condensed and right to the point, and everyone is benefiting from it.
Well, I mean, I can imagine certainly even from a management perspective, like being able to say, we need 300,000 cubes removed over the course of this, and definitively because you can measure it off the topographic maps, as opposed to, I reckon you need about 30,000.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you don't
plus
really
minus.
know until you stick the bucket in, right?
Exactly, yeah, and that also comes to the point you highlighted about transparency and streamlining the reporting of sorts, right? Like when you're the trade and you're reporting to the owner or GC, and a radical transparency approach basically takes off. It just eliminates all disputes, because everything becomes very objective. Like, here we go. This is an objective picture of what's the progress, how many cubic yards were moved over the last week. And these are the locations highlighted by heat map, right, or whatever, which you can, turn on your laptop and show, right? And so all these disputes go away, which makes, for the trades, right, it's basically about the cash flow, right? Like, you do the work, you prove it's done, you get the cash, you move on.
Right. Okay. So progress claims.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
So what about the the legalities behind using the hardware? Because I know it's like here in Australia, for example, like there are places that you can and can't fly drones, and the general rule is if it's residential, you can't. But I mean, people do, of course. But we hear. I mean, I know because I've got, as I said earlier, we're clients that do roof installation, roof reports and things like that using drones, and they're forever getting reported by neighbors and stuff for flying drones in residential areas. So how does that look? And as you mentioned before, if it's a regular site scan that's got to be done, what does that mean for people that are actually on the site? Like, have you got to clear the decks, or like how does that typically look?
Well, long story short is that everything is regulated by FAA, at least in the US, right? So there is an organization that regulates everything that flies. And the rules are very straightforward. There is a map, and there are zones, and there are rules for each zone. So in some zones, yes, you just can't fly because it's right near the landing or the launching, near the airport, right? Or you still can, like, there are zones where even if it's close to some restricted areas, you can contact the dispatcher and talk to him over the phone, and he can give you a green light on a specific time frame when to fly. But you need to get an approval like that. Or, and there are many rules. So basically, each drone pilot who flies the drone right now, not for leisure, but for commercial use, 100% have to get this 101 part 107 license. You need to pass the exam and get this certificate, and only then you can practice and fly that, which is not hard to do. Like, anyone can do it. It's just it requires some hours of learning and practicing, right? But then
it's pilot licensing.
Yeah. So after you have it, then you basically need then you need different types of insurances depending on specifically what case is out there, right? But about the residential case and all of that, when construction is in progress, usually like there are no people underneath because it's under construction right now, and everything which is above 400 feet is not a public space, meaning that you can fly there whatever you want, and people under can, like, it's not their private space anymore, so they can fly. And this is actually 300 to 400. I don't really remember, is it 300 or 400 feet, but it's a, this is exactly the elevation, the altitude of the drone, the typical one for this photogrammetry mapping to be used for the purposes we're discussing right now.
So when the like you were saying before, like it's the drone obviously has to follow some sort of consistent path or map or whatever you want to call it. Is that driven by the software? So you basically send the drone up, and then the tech just does everything. Like you don't really there's not someone sitting there flying the path, is it?
Yeah. A good thing about drones now, about mapping with drones now, is that yes, you just select the borders which you want to ultimately get a map of, right? It's like, I want the map of this district. Shoo! And then also you want to specify some technical parameters specific for mapping. And then the drone launches automatically, the drone follows the trajectory automatically, and then it lands automatically once the battery is close to zero. So now many drones have these smart batteries, which makes our life so easy. And I do remember firsthand when it wasn't like that, when you literally had to follow, like, okay, this is my voltage, this is my current, this is my voltage, this is my current. When the voltage is not the good one, you need to return your drone back by pushing specific buttons, and if you're late, it will crash somewhere randomly. So it was not a good time back then, but it evolved significantly and made it. That's why it became such a commodity in a sense, and that's why many companies, grading contractors, and other trades working in this field, we see now them being willing to create the drone program in-house, because they started to see how that saves their costs directly. So they're willing to invest into drone pilots and their education, into the drone equipment, etc., etc. But the problem is, so talking about the evolution of this trend, is that, well, at first everyone was risk averse. Oh, it's technology, it's risks, like it will crash, and I don't want to deal with it. No. Now it's getting easier. Now it's getting cheaper and way more affordable, and the companies start to evolve and purchase it and play with it and start with it. But pretty quickly they kind of get the value, because they not only need the drone part of it, right, like to capture the data, they also need all this processing part, right? Like after you collected the data, you need to process it. For processing, you need specific software as well. And you either do it kind of do-it-yourself solution, so you collect different pieces of software to ultimately get a map. And for that, you also need people and hours. And they hit the bottleneck of their own staff, because, well, usually for the trades, people that are hired there, they are in the construction process. They don't have like 6 hours in a row to figure out some software or to play with something, right? Like they're on the roll, like they have projects coming in, they need like this space.
Just give me the report.
And so what we observed, that many companies started to do this hybrid form, hybrid solution, when they do have their own pilots. They do have even in-house resources to process the data, but more frequently they start to outsource those two things to the third-party companies to do it for them, because it makes sense when you are increasing the number of projects you cover with this technology.
Well, sure.
Right.
And I mean, a lot of these bigger scale builders don't do any building anyway. They just contract it. They're essentially just project managers.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you imagine a typical grading contractor company, well, they would have several projects at a given point of time, right? If you have only in-house drone program, most likely your capacity would be only to fly, each project once a month, maybe, right? And again, what we've discussed, what's the key recipe for a success of this technology, that it really brings impact? It has to be regular. It has to be regular for all the projects, and you don't usually have this capacity in-house. So that's where people start to the complex projects, or the projects where they need these flyovers on demand, they cover it themselves. But for the rest of them, for the big bulk volume of scans, they start to order it for the third-party companies to cover the risks, to cover the regularity problem, and all of that, just to
Sure.
make it easier.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so, where is this whole conversation heading? Like, where are we? What are we going to be talking about in 10 years' time?
You mean in drone technology for trace overall?
Mm.
Good question. Well,
Where's your crystal ball?
my crystal ball is saying that definitely not the drones specifically, but various sensors and the ability to compare, to be able to capture the reality frequently, as frequent as you can, and compare that to the designs is the major key for the players to stay in the market, because the market gets more and more competitive, right? If you're not optimizing your costs, if you're not optimizing your efficiency, like you're getting pushed out of the market, right, as a trade. And so it's harder and harder to compete. So how do you compete? If you invest into optimization of your work, right, then you can provide the work cheaper, and you're getting cheaper and with the same quality, without sacrificing the quality, without sacrificing of your people, etc., etc. So my crystal ball is saying that we would definitely see the involvement of different sensors, right? Right now we are talking about drones, which are flying, by humans operating them. But very soon, and like we see that already happening, the like inbuilt hardware right in the equipment. So let's say a scraper, right? The scraper moves through the job site. It has the sensor right on it. The scraper has the route, the grading strategy, the recommendations on how to move properly to make the most of this trajectory, right? Like how to move the cut into fill in the most efficient way. At the same time, while it's moving,
Yeah.
it scans the terrain as is. And there is this feedback loop. Okay, now it's that. Readjusting the strategy. Next loop. Okay, now it's that. And you can compare that to the track racing, I think. Imagine you are a driver in the track racing, and imagine you like your race is 10 loops, right? You can't really feel this little adjustment on each loop, but in the end of the race you can be faster like several seconds, and it is already a significant distance.
Sure.
This is what we're talking about. So if we introduce the sensors of sorts, and if we do introduce the optimization algorithms on how to better do the job, you are getting these marginal improvements here and there. In the end of the day, on the horizon of the project, it gets a significant impact. And I think this is where the trades would be moving towards, because that's the only way for them to really compete and stay efficient.
I was going to ask about that because I know my wife's family are pretty big in the agriculture scene back in Canada, and they have all the excavators and tractors and stuff that has all the technology where essentially you don't even need a driver. They just sit in it and listen to the radio, I think, or hopefully my podcast. But it's all run through software. So I was thinking, if there's like a drone that's sending that information directly into the actual vehicle, then it's kind of making people redundant.
Well,
which is a huge cost saver.
It is. It's just like my take on it is that people are best, like they are awesome and better than any algorithm in creative things. When you need to create something, right? Like a civil design, right? Yeah. Like what is really the best design for future generations to live in this territory? How should it look like? What the product should look like? That is a very complex product that requires understanding of many domains. Like this is where the people are the best, right? Or even in grading and even in site work, the management part of this thing is actually me coming from a totally not construction background. I'm coming from academia. I'm a physicist. I have a PhD in laser physics, right? Like how on earth this relates to. I was fascinated by the engineering complexity of how you can manage differently, in the site work to do that properly. So I think that these algorithms and optimization and sensors and drones, right, all of that is really the best to implement for the execution part. So once the plan is created by humans. And so at the same time, humans also would be significantly empowered when during the creation of their plans, the algorithm suggests some strategies for them, and now they choose, okay, this or that or that. And this is also part of the deal, because human beings, like they have reduced limited amount of time to think and brainstorm on options and different options on how to grade things, for example, right? Like how to create a grading plan, while the algorithm can run millions of options and optimize on specific parameter and
Yeah.
suggest like two best ones. And then the human takes the
Sure.
different level of generalization and picks one.
Do you think that there'll ever be a point where this sort of technology will be able to run off like a satellite, for example, as opposed to a drone?
Satellite instead of drone?
Instead of a drone scanning, like would it be able to run off like a satellite scan or something similar? Like you look at Google Maps and you look at all these other sort of technologies that use similar but not exactly the same sort of thing, where they run off satellite pictures as opposed to drone pictures.
Well, I might tell you that the satellite technology has been used a lot in construction as well. And drones is it's an evolvement of the satellite technology. So the first terrain models on a larger areas, right? They were initially created and developed by different satellite providers, right? Like satellites also can do the mapping. It just uses a little different method for that, but it's possible. Even for sometimes some counties and some specific zip codes, they have publicly available terrain topos available through the satellite data, which was purchased or whatever by the government, right? So it is being utilized, but they have significantly more limitations because the atmosphere and the clouds and all of that, it's unpredictable, so you can control it. And also you can control the frequency in a sense, like it's way less cost efficient to send a satellite in a very specific place every week. It's not practical as of now. It's happening well. Yeah. So yeah, I think
I only ask because I know that I think there's that conversation around compliance and where you can and can't fly these drones, or the outcome is necessary regardless in terms of the reporting you get from these surveys. But I'm just wondering if there's instances where you may not be able to fly a drone. If there is technology available through things like satellite, which can deliver a similar result. I know I know a lot of the roofing clients that we've worked with and some builders over the years have used, like we've got a program over here called Near Maps. I don't know if that's in the US, but it's kind of like Google Maps on steroids, and they use it for doing roof surveys, and they use it for measuring and things like that. So they haven't actually got to go out on site, like in the renovation space, especially, it's quite useful. But I mean, that said, it probably doesn't need the degree of, topographic surveying that, what we're talking about here delivers. But like that is sort of available. People are using that kind of stuff already.
Yeah, people try to use whatever is possible in the visual aspect. So they would take anything. Satellite image, perfect, we'll take it. Like drone imagery, great. Very accurate drone topography, perfect. Surveyors, topo, even better, but usually very expensive, not on time. Like you can't rely on it sometimes due to schedule. So whatever is available, it is being used. And I think it's just, Go ahead.
Do you think part of the evolution, like that whole compliance conversation, is going to get easier or harder, like with this technology? Like, do you think there's going to be more people throwing up red flags in terms of where you can and can't use them, or do you think the technology will evolve with the compliance, and there'll be safer parameters put in place, better technology, better fail safes, and things like that, where people can use them with less red flags?
Well, analyzing the previous traction of this question and the history, it only gets better. It gets more regulated, but it makes it easier for the practical aspect, at least as it was happening before. Yeah. Now, how it will be happening in future, well, it always comes down to, since it's, government domain, it will be definitely different in different countries, and it will be definitely different in how the countries approach that. So In general, I'm an optimist, thinking that we're only getting better in terms of how we start to use practical things. So yeah, I do think that it will be easier rather than more complicated.
I mean, you see it all over the place with new technology. Like look at driverless cars, right? Like in all these kind of things. Like at first, everyone's freaking out, and but then over time, the technology evolves, and then, like you say, the regulation sort of evolves and adapts with it to make it more mainstream and make it more accessible, I suppose, to
Absolutely.
individuals.
Yeah. I think that's the trend going forward.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. It's it's one of those things, I suppose, that people they may know of it, but they may not fully understand like the application and where these things become practically available to them, and what sort of space they can use these sort of technologies. So what should people do off the back of this? I mean, I'll link to the website in the show notes for you guys out there that are listening to this. TraceAir, TraceAir.net is Maria's website. Is there any information forums, or is there any place people can go to get general information about the evolution of this space, and maybe some insight into practical applications and things like that?
Oh yeah, there are like thousands of resources. I'm even struggling to just specific ones,
Okay.
but well, I mean that's the problem again, right? Like when you have too much information, you're lost in it.
Right.
So what I would be
Yeah, of
suggesting,
course.
For the companies or people interested and thinking potentially in either adopting this technology or just playing with it or reading how it evolves. Well, there are some customer stories and then some considerations about it on our blog. We pay attention to that closely, right? Because for us, it's the major enabler for our business. As long as people are not freaking out about it, and as long as they do see a direct value in that, like that unlocks us to deliver that value. So we do provided some business case studies on how that involved in trade specifically as well.
And do you guys work with companies all over the world? I mean, I suppose the technology is
That's true. That is true. So as of now, us still being a startup, already pretty big one, but still having this lean mindset and everything, we mainly focus and operate in the US as of now. And yeah, that's where.
Is a lot of the data and the reporting and like, is it the measurement systems? Are they Imperial or are they metric, or
it's such a pain. We're waiting when the US will transition into metric system. It's just oh my god, like how many mistakes are being done in everything and in the design. Like who measures the distance in feet? Like
I know. It's just so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous once you know, like, metric. Like when actually, I listened to a podcast on this. Interestingly, slight segue, but the USA actually technically is on the metric system, but it just never got adopted. Like it was just so hard for them to conceptualize. And I mean, I have to speak to my dad, and like going back, not that long ago when Australia was imperial, and like they still. Like sometimes there's things that they can't. I mean, we still do it here. Like we'll do things. Well, how much do you weigh? 80 kilos. How tall are you? 6'1".
Interesting. That's an interesting.
And even in construction here in Australia, we'll do the same thing. Like we'll go say things like, I used to be a plumber, and we'll go say things like, go and cut me 2.5 meters of 6-inch.
That's
Or go and cut me 3 meters of 4-inch. Like it's kind of funny. But I think like America.
That is actually a true joke or anecdote I heard somewhere. Like what's the easiest way to make an American laugh? Ask him a question: how many feet is in the mile? In 1 mile? And there is like,
yeah.
Wow, because if you're asking like how many meters in the kilometer, it's an obvious question. But if you're asking how many feet in 1 mile, it's like never thought about it.
So is the technology then? Is it metric?
It's agnostic. Like we do have, since we also work in some job sites in Europe and in Russia and in different countries. it's agnostic, right? So it can translate equally to metric or imperial.
Yeah, I mean, you like to think, with like it is heading metric bit by bit, and I think it is. I mean, if you look at obviously like NASA and things like that, I mean, obviously they can't go around using feet and inches. It's all very much metric from what I understand. But anyway, it's yeah. I was just curious because I can imagine like I mean, I've worked in construction in the US, and I can imagine them getting a report back with all this metric data, and them going, "What the hell is this?" Like, no.
But it's funny. I originally being raised in metric system. It's only now when I think about the volume of a stockpile, I think about it in cubic yards. And if someone would tell me, yes, because my major experience was here in visual assessing of this stockpile looks like 200 cubic yards, and I have no idea how many cubic meters it is, and like if I would be asked, I would be struggling.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's confusing, but anyway. All right, cool. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for your time, and thank you for shedding some light on something which I think people like the idea of, but in truth, really have no idea about.
My pleasure.
So it'll be very interesting to see how this this space evolves. Like there's obviously quite a large future with it. I'm just interested to see which way it evolves to, and especially on the residential scale. I'd love to see what that how that pans out.
Sure.
Because I think that'd be certainly for this audience, like extremely relevant.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Anyway, well, thank you very much for your time. As I said, listeners, viewers, I'll link back to Maria's website and stuff in the show notes. So head across to the siteshed.com and you can get access to all those links in the show notes there. Maria, thank you once again for your time, and look forward to chatting in the future.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Folks, if you enjoyed this topic, you are definitely going to enjoy episode 272 with Aaron McKay, which was called Converting More Leads and Showing Your Expertise, where in that episode, he did talk about how you can use drone technology a little bit more in the residential space. Episode 345, where I talked about the Hub, which is a new technology we've developed to help trade businesses manage their entire businesses, especially sales and marketing. So we'll put some links to them in that post. Go and check them out. Please be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on so you don't miss out on our next episodes. I'd love to hear your feedback or your experience on this podcast. So please leave us some comments and let us know what you'd like to hear in upcoming episodes.